Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for coming in. Could I just ask you two things? Do you want to just elaborate on that point you were making just about fear of speaking to the media? Could you just, you were cut off there. Would you like to say anything?
Well, I've said it as it is, and you know, I've been dealing with the media on this 24/7 for the last 8 days, and I think in fairness to the Irish media, when they see a story they go after it, and I have yet to be able to produce someone who will talk to the media about this. Many workers are agency, as we've talked about. They feel very vulnerable. I believe, anecdotally, that workers who were tested positive for COVID in the past and were brought to the field hospital in City West didn't give contact tracing information because they didn't understand what they were being asked, or they had fear of putting another worker out of the workplace. That's at the height of this in May of this year. So, yes, workers are reluctant to do so because they fear there would be some retribution if they do. That is the reality.
In relation to the agency staff, I just want to get a better handle on the structures involved, the agencies involved in employing. How many agencies are involved, do you know, or what's the proliferation?
So, if I may, first I would just like to add something to the previous point, very briefly, in 10 seconds.
I'm sorry, it's okay, but my...
Okay, fine. So then with the agencies, so there are several agencies involved. They regularly, this is systematic among agencies, if they can get away with it, they pay people less and offer worse conditions than those that are directly employed, and this situation is only corrected when there is an inspection or a whistleblower goes to WRC or whatever. One of the main agencies in this sector has been pursuing this scheme for years that we have tried to describe today, by which workers who are working full-time and were employed full-time in Ireland were actually declared as self-employed contractors from Poland, and all their social contributions were paid to Polish revenue.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just the question is, how many agencies are involved?
Well, it is hard to know. I mean, there are several agencies. There are a number of agencies. I don't know, let's say in our factories, each factory maybe will work with one agency. But then throughout the sector, there are probably 5 or 6 agencies who all provide workers, source them from different places. And I mostly know about workers sourced from Eastern Europe, but there are also agencies who bring, for instance, workers from Brazil, but that's a different procedure because often those workers are brought in on visa permits. So that's a different procedure than for European workers. Yeah. So I don't know, I would say that maybe there's up to a dozen agencies. I don't think it's very relevant. They all have similar practice.
Sorry, it's relevant to me because it's a question of interest to me. So what I'm interested in is the agencies, whether they're agencies based in Ireland, the number of people whom they're
yes, so these agencies are based in Ireland, and even when this agency was working through its Polish subsidiary, actually the workers were hired and were in close contact always with the Irish staff of this agency, even though all the financial and contract business was done through the Polish subsidiary just to evade tax in Ireland, basically. But people who were always from the beginning in contact with the Irish staff of this agency, and it's an agency which is based in Waterford and which was started in Ireland, and actually all the people who are described as Polish self-employed contractors in their contracts, they had no ties to Poland. They weren't even Polish. They had never set foot in Poland. So even if they were insured in Poland, they were actually Romanian.
Okay. What I'm trying to do, and I appreciate, thank you for the additional information in relation to some, what I'm trying to do is just to get a systemic review of the number of agencies, where they're based, the proliferation, because I can imagine that they have different practices potentially, that they have different recruitment practices, different contractual practices. So we need to be very careful that saying one about one doesn't necessarily implicate others in it. And so I'm just...
This is why inspections would be necessary, systematic inspections from revenue, which would compare who is on the payroll of a factory to how many workers are actually declared to revenue. A union can have no exhaustive information on this because we only know the people who are unionized with us. For instance, all these people who are falsely declared in Poland, they are completely invisible in Ireland. They do not appear as being insured, as having PPS numbers. So, for instance, we uncovered hundreds of cases in several plants that are unionized with us, but hundreds more, even thousands more such people might still be working in these conditions in other plants, and this can only be found out through inspections from, let's say, Scope, who is supposed to assess if people are employees or self-employed, from the Department of Social Welfare, from Revenue, and so on. A union can have no numbers beyond what its actual members, experience.
Deputy, if I may just be assist on that, I believe the number of agencies is somewhere in the region of 7 or 8. I believe just below 30% of the workers would be agency workers. And my colleague has mentioned Scope, who I believe in this case really needs support and need to be beefed up, because they don't. I haven't dealt with them some years ago, and I don't think it's changed a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. They do not have the resources to carry out the inspections that's necessary. So that's why we need a holistic view of what's happening in the meat industry with all stakeholders. And I reiterate my request that I made to the then Minister of Agriculture to set that up back in May. We're 4 months later, we have another 500 COVID cases, we have lockdowns in regions. This government needs to get real and put everything it has in its arsenal to deal with this pandemic.
Do your members communicate the names of the agencies? Do any of you have a list of the agencies that, and we don't want to name people publicly because that's not what we do in these committees, but do you have a list of the agencies?
I'm sure I can get that list for you.
Greatly appreciated, thank you. And you said about 30% of your workers are working in that?
30% of workers in the industry.
In the industry generally?
We all have our members.
Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say.
Doing the Polish contract scheme in my long report, which we filed in July for the first session of this committee. So you can, I suppose, every member of the committee has received this report, and the agency is named the main culprit from, in our opinion, and its practices are being described. So
Thank you.
I will not name it here.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.